Hi! Welcome to Let's Go Kickass today. I'm your host, Vicky Carter. This is a monthly podcast where I chat to inspirational people from the fields of music, adventure and culture. People who basically are really kicking ass and making their own rules in life. So if you want to feel empowered and inspired, you've come to the right place. In this episode, I chat to managing director and founder of My Soul Radio and the pioneer behind the Kiss brand, Gordon Mack, about his passion behind his profession and how he got to where he is now.
The thing that you've got to do is make sure that your product, there is a market for it, and you have to wear 4 different caps.
I also chat to fellow traveller, journalist and writer Rosemary Brown about her love affair with Victorian adventurer and journalist Nellie Bly, other kick-ass Victorian adventurers, and the importance of inspirational role models.
I want other young women to get that there were people now and there are people then, and that you can, as a woman, achieve what you want to achieve.
Finally, I speak to Gina Gardiner, author, motivational speaker and life coach, about her life experiences and how they've shaped and pushed her to reach out and positively impact other people's lives.
My mouth, my eyes, my brain and my hands worked. I could go and do something really productive that was, I believed, important and not feel disabled. Or I could be at home and be incredibly limited. What would you choose?
First up, Gordon Mack. Now, if you're a fan of soul, funk, disco, house, R&B, drum and bass, jazz, then you've probably heard of My Soul Radio, the station that's taken London by storm. With an eclectic array of DJs, pretty much all genres, I chat to the man behind the music. So when you started out creating Kiss in 1985, what inspired you to do so?
Love of music, really, and I mean, it started in 1985. I wanted to be on the radio, and I was DJing on a pirate radio station, because that's how there was only 2 radio stations in London at that point. It's kind of, there was Capital and there was Radio London. Oh, and Radio 1, of course, and there's no way I was ever going to be lucky enough to get on there. So you start your own radio station up, and kind of, even if I'd have got onto Capital Radio or Radio 1, they wouldn't have let me play the music that I wanted to play. And there was such a big movement in the pirate scene. So that's how it all started. It started by me, the station that I was on, they went off air to go for a community radio station, and the guy that was running it, he said to me, if you get a chance to go on another station, go on one, because we probably wouldn't employ you once we get the license, because yeah, I know, because you don't speak properly, and you kind of very, very got an accent south. He said, so go on. So I was like, oh, okay, right then. So I went off, and within a couple of months, myself and some pals, we got together, George Power and Tosca and an engineer, got together and we created our own station, which was Kiss FM.
Yeah, good for you. That's really inspiring. Just go out and do it yourself.
That's right.
Yeah, so you were the first station to broadcast exclusively black music. How did you change a part-time pirate radio station to a successful, important cultural business?
A lot of money. I mean, it cost a lot of money to actually to take it from pirate to legal, and a lot of learning. If you can imagine, you're running a pirate radio station with a handful of mates and all the rest of it, and trying to turn that into a legal radio station that pays, it pays taxes and pays PPL and pays things and all that stuff. It was a steep learning curve, but worth it. But very, it was a stressful time, but it was a really, really enjoyable time.
It's a roller coaster of emotions. Yeah, it sounds on a daily basis.
Exactly.
Yeah, both you and Martin put Kiss FM together, and you founded it, and you did the same thing with My Soul. Was there any obstacles that you learned with Kiss that you have now mirrored with My Soul that you've managed to push through?
Yeah, I think. The way in which we've set My Soul up is that everybody that's invested in it, and out of the £1.4 million that we raised to get it up and get it going. Everybody that's invested in it is a music lover, not a strategical business that kind of may want to, change what we're here to do. And that's meant that we've kept a certain amount of control of it. the actual the landscape, this is one of the things that got me back into radio. Really, was that with the new technologies, I can see the deregulation of radio coming. And so to actually be here to be part of that is kind of quite exciting. You know, I was there when they said, you know, radio's being deregulated and kind of in 1990 when it went from just two stations, two commercial radio stations in London to, I think it's about 15 or something like that, when they kind of, you know, when Jazz came on and when Kiss FM came on and Choice FM and WNK and the Greek station, right? And that was an exciting time. The problem with it was that it all went back to, you know, kind of the big companies just owning everything again, just the way it was, you know, kind of. So that was a bit of a kind of an emotional roller coaster, and that's when I came out of the radio industry, because it promised so much, but it just went back. Within 10 years, it just gone back to the way that it was before, a couple of stations running everything. And now it's the technology that's going to change all that, because, you know, more and more young people are listening to stuff online, and when they grow up, they're not going to go back to AM radios. They're going to, you know, they're going to enhance the digital, and that's the future. And so it's kind of a very interesting time, and, you know, with DAB Plus and everything, it's a really interesting time. I'm really excited about it all.
Yeah, I can see.
Yes, it gets me up
See
in the morning.
enthusiasm. Yeah, it's wonderful.
And I love radio and I love music. I mean, somebody said to me, "Why are you doing this?" And it's because I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. And that's the honest truth.
And what I love about My Soul is that you're not this huge global organisation, but you're a family. And I've heard the stories of when you're back at Kiss FM, you know, you push the DJs to invest in their own station, and that created, you know, a wonderful working environment. How important is it to have that environment to create a successful business? I
think that I always go by the feeling that you spend more time at work than you do at home. Exactly. Awake.
Yeah.
And so what you should do is you should try and make that as enjoyable time, because nobody wants to go to somewhere where they don't like it. And if they don't like coming here, then they shouldn't come here. They should go off and do something else. And, you know, it's got to be enjoyable. And people tend to do things like with Kiss, it was a passion. It was a kind of, you know, it was a revolution. It was kind of actually having dance music on the radio and kind of having that whole revolution, and, you know, people were there for the passion. And it's a bit like My Soul, you know, kind of when we first came on, we was the only radio station that was playing the kind of the music that we were playing on legal radio. There's other stations doing it on the internet and everything else, but, you know, we was the only one that came on and done it on, you know, DAB. And that's, you know, that spurned a whole change, because there's quite a few on now doing it, and it's kind of, and that's exciting, you know. It's kind of the technology. It comes back to technology and doing things that kind of, and making it as comfortable a working place and fun. Yeah. Who wants to go to work and kind of be bored or
yeah, exactly.
And, you know, we've been together now. You know, some of us have been together. A lot of us have been together for 7-8 years, and before that, people, you know, I mean, some of the DJs here have been working with me from 1985. I mean, you know, kind of Lindsay Wesker and, you know, a whole load of the old ex-Kiss DJs, Dave VJ, and, you know, have been working with me since those times. So, you know, there's a certain bond there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What's in store for My Soul in the future?
Well, we're launching a station which is, it's going to be on DAB Plus in Brighton, and it's going to be online, and we're going to beta test it for about a year. And it's a house music station which just plays nothing but house music. So it's called My House. It does what it says on the tin.
Yeah, wonderful.
And we've got some really good DJs that are adding to the, you know, the really good team that we've got already. So we're adding some new DJ, or quite a few new DJs, you know, the likes of Chrissy T, Jazzy M, who's sort of, you know, one of the founders of house music radio in this country.
Wow.
And so we're adding to that, and we're creating a My House radio station. So that's available via the app. That's nice. One to watch. And then we've because we were with we was doing something called My Soul Connoisseurs. And that's now finished, and we're now we're creating a new station, one that kind of is more rare groove soul and kind of an easier listen kind of, and that's kind of just going to be a back-to-back music station for the I don't know, 6 months or so.
Wow, so My Soul is fully expanding and developing and
Yeah.
bringing in new talent and old talent, mixing all together.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
great.
so, and we're trying to just kind of, so it's a one-stop shop for your musical taste. If you're into soul, house, R&B, rare groove, boogie, whatever.
Oh, perfect. And finally, last question. If someone is aspiring to be a managing director of a radio station or setting up their own radio station, what advice would you give to them?
Keep your costs down.
Yeah,
It's true.
seriously.
In radio, or in any business, it's easy to spend money, but it's very difficult to save money and to achieve good quality on less money. But if you can do that, then you've got a success or recipe. What I suggest, advice to give to budding MDs, stroke founders, the thing that you've got to do is make sure that your product, there is a market for it. And you have to wear, 4 different caps. So you have to wear kind of a sales cap, a programming cap, a cap which kind of manages the team and drives them forward. And then you've got to kind of be a shoulder to cry on. So there's many different hats that MD stroke, especially if it's a small company like ours. I mean, my partner, Martin, I'm very lucky because he can read and write and does accounts, and he's kind of accountant. He comes from that background. So between us, and I'm the creative lovey, so between us we managed to wear enough hats to hope keep it going.
You can really hear the passion and love for My Soul Radio Gordon has, but also for the music as well. You can listen on DAB, online or on mobile to My Soul Radio in London, Brighton, Manchester and Glasgow. My second guest of this month's episode is traveller, writer and journalist Rosemary Brown. We met at the Women Adventure Expo last year at the Royal Geographical Society, and her enthusiasm for travel, Victorian adventurers, journalism and feminism really shines through not only in her work, but also in her life too. So tell us more about your love affair with Nellie Bly. Who is she? When did it start?
Well, I've always been intrigued by Victorian female travelers because they were traveling against all odds. So I've always been interested in reading books and looking into things. And so I met Nellie Bly online. I was researching traveling Victorian women, and basically I like to say she jumped off the screen into my life, and it hasn't been the same since, and that would have been 2013. And it was just everything about her really worked for me because I was looking for someone that I might be able to follow. She's a journalist. I'm a journalist. She was American. I've got American citizenship, but I am British. And everything fell into line. And what she did was so courageous. But what was even more impressive is that she is the pioneer of investigative journalism. So while I followed in her footsteps around the world, the thing that impresses me the most is that she went undercover in about 1885. She convinced the authorities in New York that she was insane. She practiced becoming insane so she could be admitted to the Women's Insane Asylum on Blackwell Island in New York. She got committed all right. In fact, they wouldn't even let her out. And but she wanted to find out what really happened inside, and what really happened inside was atrocious. The women were being tortured. If you weren't crazy when you went in, you'd be crazy by the time if you ever got to leave. So she then wrote a whole lot of stories uncovering this information, and reforms were made. And the rest of her journalistic life, she was always working for the underdog. She was a humanitarian, and she brought about a lot of reforms. So that's what I admire the most, but I wasn't going to try to get myself committed to an insane asylum.
Crikey, maybe not, no.
But so she set that in motion, and that's a way that a lot of good journalism gets written these days, and how we come about with reforms. I got a hold of her book, which is Around the World in 72 Days, and the more I read about her, the more I really connected with her, because what kind of a woman in 1889 is going to say, I want to travel around the world and I want to write about it and I want to go alone and I want to carry, I just want to have a little case so that I'm free. She originally had the idea to do this trip around the world. She gained a reputation because of being in the asylum and writing those articles. So her editors had a high regard for her. So she went to her editor and said, I think I can go around the world faster than Phileas Fogg did in Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. And he said, well, that's a great idea, but we're going to give it to a man. It's your idea, but we're going to give it to a man because you'd need a chaperone. You'd have about 10 cases and trunks. You don't speak any other languages. We're going to send, if we send anybody, we'll send a man. And she said, okay, fine, send a man. I'm going to the competing newspaper and see what they say. And eventually they knew that, and she said, let's see who would win this race. So anyway, they said, okay, if anybody goes, you can go. But it took them a year to get their act together. Then they gave her 3 days notice. They said, can you go the day after tomorrow? And she said, I could go this minute.
She's so powerful and inspiring, isn't she?
How could you, how can you resist? So all these eccentricities, I also like eccentricity, and she's totally eccentric, but totally committed to humanitarian causes. This trip was not about humanitarian causes, but this trip opened the door to travel. It opened the door to women traveling. Her own journalism opened the door to female journalists like you and I, Vicky. You know, back then, there weren't women in the newsroom. The men were in there smoking cigarettes, swearing, drinking whiskey, and they had no place for women. And Nellie said, I'm here. I'm going to do this. And they paved, and that paved the way for people like you and I 50 years later. It really did. I think it's incredible. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. I can source those kind of quotes. But she really was someone amazing. I didn't think she was going to take over my life for 5 years. I mean,
you're writing a book about her now.
And I think that she's sending these things my way. But I didn't expect her to take I did the trip. I kept a blog. I turned the blog into...
How was the trip?
The trip was wonderful. But maybe I was a little bit too much like her. Because I was single-minded. I was going to follow in her footsteps. There was no room to maneuver, partly because of timing. I had a teenage daughter, and I have a really nice husband, and they weren't too thrilled about me going away for forever. So I was gone 6 weeks. And I agreed with them that I wouldn't go to the places that the Foreign Office said you can't go to, which at the time was Aden. It's called Yemen now. And at the time, Egypt was a mess. And so I'm sad to have missed those places, but it was a deal. I struck a deal.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So my trip was wonderful, but I'm saying I was like her. She was totally single-minded. For her, it was a race. It was not a race for me. But I was so determined that I forgot to write down my own personal feelings. I mean, I felt them, but I didn't record them. And I usually am a keen journal keeper. So I'm struggling a little bit with the book, trying to remember how I felt in certain situations. But I did record as a journalist all those things. But journalism and books are two different things. So I'm trying to make a journalistic piece into a literary nonfiction.
Which is a challenge in itself.
For me, it's a challenge. Yeah.
Speaking about other Victorian adventurers, who else pushed the boundaries and broke stereotypes around a similar time?
Well, I'm very happy to say that in my research, not in my travels, but in my research, I ran into Isabella Bird.
Oh, wow.
She went to Japan before Nellie, and she went to Japan shortly after Japan was opened, because Japan was an isolated nation for 200 years until until the 1850s. And when it became open, Isabella Bird went straight over, made friends with the ambassador, and ended up going into parts of Japan that women, particularly women like her, had never been. So she explored Japan when it hadn't been seen by Westerners for 200 years. So I have a huge admiration for her. Plus, she traveled across all kinds of continents on yaks, on sleds. So she's someone that I admire. And also Mary Kingsley. Mary Kingsley was extraordinary. She didn't come across as extraordinary because she dressed quite drably, and you might have seen the hat in the Royal Geographical Society, so her hat is there. And she wore long dresses in this hat and climbed Mount Cameroon. But she, again, I mean, society said, you better stay home and look after your parents. Then her brother got sick. She had to look after him. And then when they were all gone or looked after, she took off and she did extraordinary things. And she also was ahead of her time because she wrote a book about questioning colonialism. And also, she really was working for the rights of indigenous people. She was very worried that they were being exploited. At that time, at the end of the 19th century, that was quite extraordinary. I mean, it's still an issue now, but she was ahead of the game.
Wow, not only with their travels and adventures, because they're hiking mountains with traditional Victorian gear, some of them in corsets, but also yes, with their mentality and education with other societies is incredible. I mean, thinking about their travels and their adventures, how do you feel about women travelling now? Do we still have quite a long way to go to change those perceptions, or do you think we've moved on quite a bit?
Well, I think we have moved on quite a bit. I think we still have to be very sensible. When I'm traveling on my own, which I do quite a bit, which I enjoy, I always have some type of a plan. I dress appropriately because unfortunately we have to take these things into account. I walk like I know where I'm going, but I haven't got a clue. Yeah. And I always travel light because, like Nellie and anybody else, who wants to have to deal with suitcases? So I do believe we have moved on a lot, and I think it's becoming more and more common, and for me that's really wonderful because people are learning that how much you can learn about the world, about yourself, about your abilities when you travel alone or travel with friends. But I think the doors are open. There will be some countries where you'd have to be incredibly careful. And I always try to respect the rules. If you're supposed to wear a scarf, and I don't wear revealing clothes. I don't dress like a nun, but I try to behave in a way that nothing could make people think that I was anything but serious, fun-loving, but a serious traveler, maybe even explorer.
No, yeah, exactly. It's about respecting the culture and fitting in with everyone else, and adjusting to their way of life. Nellie Bly and all those other Victorian adventurers are fantastic role models. How important is it to have a role model for all women to look up to?
Oh, I'm a great believer in role models. So Nellie's my role model now. And I've got a lot of role models. And one of the reasons I took this trip is because I had a 19-year-old daughter, and I wanted her to have an appropriate role model because the role models today tend to be celebrities that their behavior isn't really role model it's not worthy of being role models, but they are role models. I don't want to diss them. They can do what they want to do, but I was worried about that our family knew more about the Kardashian family than any other family. We knew about Lindsay Lohan, Paris Hilton, and I just thought, actually, let's look at some women that really, really beat the status quo. And my daughter responded to that. She really, I think, gained a new insight into feminism or gender equality. And she's probably, you would say, jealous of Nellie Bly because I'm spending a lot of time on her. But she gets it. And I want other young women to get that there were people now and there are people then, and that you can, as a woman, achieve what you want to achieve with focus, with help from your friends, by following role models. So I'm a great believer in role models.
100%. I feel on a daily basis, I've luckily got such a wonderful friends network, and we're supporting each other and we're pushing each other to achieve our goals, because sometimes we do face obstacles because of our gender, because of our lack of opportunities, and luckily we've got people in the same situation as us motivating us. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, and there's a lot of groups now. There are a lot of resources. There's a lot of possibilities, so that if you were interested in doing something like this, there's support to either go on your own or go with group. The potential these days is wonderful, and I hope people will take full advantage of that.
I think that's what differs. I mean, the Royal Geographical Society, they had such a closed kind of group and organisation. It took them a very long time. I think you said in 1930.
I need to check the facts, but
round
way
about
too
that
long.
time, yeah, way too long for women to join. And now women are doing it themselves, and they're creating their own groups and supporting each other. It's wonderful.
I think it's really great, and I'm glad. And I think it does a lot. It's not just that you see the world, it's that you know your own capabilities. And once you know that, world almost is your oyster, because if you know that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish by focusing, by whatever, then the sky's the limit. I like to say the sky is the limit, and even the sky isn't the limit anymore. You can go to space.
I like that. That's wonderful. That's so nice. So like you mentioned, Nellie, yourself and I were all journalists. What inspires you to write, and what motivates you to keep on writing?
Well, when I keep my journal, I write, this sounds really corny, but I write because it seems to be an inroad into my soul, if I can get, so that I do for my own kind of well-being. And because sometimes it's fun to go back a few years and see what you were writing. Journalistically, there are messages that I want to get out there that you're getting out there. There are messages about women and women travelers then and now, messages about gender equality, messages about humanitarianism. That motivates me if I think I can get a message across, probably subtly, because we don't want to rant. I just want to put out the good points and let people pick up what they like. I also work very closely with asylum seekers and refugees. So I write about that sometimes too, because I don't understand, we're all humans, how we can be treating them the way we do right now. So I actually got a Churchill Fellowship to do some traveling and study some of the projects in Ireland and Greece where communities have come together to create opportunities for the refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers in their own area, mostly by learning the English language.
Finally, last question. Where's the favourite place that you've travelled to, and what's been your favourite country to write about, or specific place?
Well, I guess I'd have to say Japan, because I'd never been to Japan before. Japan was also Nellie's favorite place. Nellie, who was quite almost snide and at times, just became infatuated with Japan. She loved everything about it. And I can understand that, because it was a beautiful country. And I saw some wonderful things. In Japan, in Tokyo, I could see what she saw. In Yokohama, no, because there was an earthquake in 1923 that wiped it off the face of the earth. Now, the most challenging place to visit was China, because, Hong Kong was fine, although I was there just as the Umbrella Revolution was fomenting. But then in China, in Canton, I couldn't find most of the things I wanted to, because they've been hidden. There were execution grounds, and she wrote extensively about that, and there were other leper colonies, and a lot of kind of sad, morbid things that have been hidden. And even the temples had been, after the Cultural Revolution, some of them were gone, and some of them had been completely transformed. So I had to really work hard to try to find them. But one thing I'd like to say for your listeners, and something that you already know, but the kindness of strangers. Oh my goodness. Nellie writes about the kindness of strangers. Her epilogue is saying, basically, I couldn't have done it without the help of people. I would be walking around in some town in China with pictures, because if you show people pictures and you don't speak the language, they might be able, and some people would walk me all the way there, or it was amazing. People just came out of the woodwork to help. They were excited about it. But there is, for all people that have concerns about traveling, the kindness of strangers is out there. There are people out there. There's a whole lot more people out there to help you than that are going to try to hurt you, in my opinion. Believe in humanity.
Wonderful words there by Rosemary. Believe in humanity. And I completely agree. I mean, when I've travelled around the world, people will go out of their way to help you, share meals with you, invite you into their house, even invite you to their wedding. The world really is a magnificent place. Finally, my last guest of this month's episode is Gina Gardiner, author, motivational speaker, and life coach. She talks about seeing her disability as not a weakness, but a strength, and how we as individuals can overcome the limitations we put on ourselves to achieve happiness.
So firstly, could we start off with the life experience that changed your life forever, as it were?
I was appointed to be the deputy head of a large junior school. That was in 1982. And I was appointed to be the catalyst for change. We'd been very busy, and in February I took myself off skiing. Whilst I was there, I had a really serious ski accident. I fell about 150, 200 feet down a mountain. And to start with, I thought I'd got away with concussion and tweaking a nerve in my neck. But I was then, 4 weeks later, back skiing with the school. I was the deputy leader for the borough party. We had 156 10 and 11-year-olds. And as the week went on, I became more and more like Quasimodo. And on the last day, I went back to my room and I found that I was paralysed down one side. I didn't want to frighten the children, and I just had to wait for somebody to come. To cut a very long story short, my mobility returned to some extent, but over the years I deteriorated. I became the head 6 months after the accident because the then head had suddenly died. I was acting head and then appointed to be the head. And I was determined that the school and the children and the staff within the school were going to do well and would not be affected by my health. I was a head for 20 years, and for most of my headship, I ran my school from a wheelchair. Now, there's an enormous gift in that. I learnt to walk twice as an adult, and what I recognised was that even though I couldn't physically get into the classrooms because the wheelchair was too big, there was no space, I had to find a way of empowering people to take responsibility for their own performance, because I was absolutely determined that it was going to be a place of excellence where children could be happy and where children and staff could grow and thrive. And therein lies the gift, because I found strategies which enabled people to understand in the context of the school what excellence was and what behaviours were required to ensure excellence, and that people took responsibility not only for their own performance but a shared responsibility for other people's. That it was successful can be seen. We were one of the first beacon schools. We were on the best 200 schools in the country list twice during my tenure. We had lots of kite marks, and I believe it's because there was this incredible shared sense that this place and its performance in the children's education and future is very much determined by how we act, every choice we make, how we operate individually and collectively. And that's been the basis of my life's work. I left headship in 2004, mainly because I was working a 15-hour day and my health was deteriorating. And since then I've worked with individuals, couples, organisations using the same principles, and they really, really work. What I recognised is that it didn't matter which route people came in, whether it was as an individual wanting life coaching or relationship coaching or business coaching, that there were 5 areas of their life that we looked at, and it didn't matter who it was and where they came from. We had to look at beliefs, relationships, people's attitude and thinking around success, how they managed change and transition, and then what really floated their boat, what was their purpose, their passion, how did they achieve fulfillment. And that's now, for me, that's my big project, is how do I help and support people to grow into recognising that they're not broken, that they are enough, that they have the capacity to grow and to be powerful beings. But being powerful doesn't mean that you have to make somebody else weak in order to do it. So I have a mission, and my mission is to positively impact 1 million people in the next 5 years.
That's incredible. First of all, for being so strong and inspirational, but admirable as well to continue your work, and then that leads you to, you know, your future paths and projects and inspiring and yeah, impacting other people's lives. Going back to becoming head teacher, what was it like going back with more workload, more stress, but less mobility? That must have been quite frustrating.
The reality was, if I was at home and I had carers come in, they hadn't put a cup out for me and filled the kettle, I couldn't make myself a cup of coffee. I had daytime TV. I could read a book. If I went to school, I could do a job I loved that I felt was really useful. If I needed a cup of coffee, somebody would get me one. My mouth, my eyes, my brain and my hands worked. I could go and do something really productive that was, I believed, important and not feel disabled, or I could be at home and be incredibly limited. What would you choose?
Exactly. Well, that's really clear. Obviously, yeah, I choose to use the other parts that I can. How would you say you addressed the setbacks and challenges that you faced?
I think it would be unreal of me to say that there weren't at times really dark days when you thought, oh, the first time was hard enough. The second time that I had to learn to walk again, in many ways was much harder than the first, not least of which that I was physically less able. But again, I think it's about, you make choices. Everything we do is a choice, and even not choosing is a choice. And every choice has consequences. So I could focus on what I couldn't do. I could think about all of the limitations and the pain. Work was incredible pain control. During the day when I was working, I switched off the body, and that in itself caused some difficulty because I would push myself in order to be doing what I felt was important. And then when I finished at night or the holidays, the body would say, ha, now you listen to us. And I was a workaholic, and work was great pain control. And that, I think one has to get a balance, and I don't think I did. And that's still something that I work on. But ultimately, if you are doing something that you are passionate about, that you think is important, then the other stuff takes a second place. You focus on what you can do rather than what you can't. And I think that's been my way of coping with all of this, is to look at, well, okay, I can't do that, but I can do whatever. But every day is a new day. And if it's a bad day, then thinking this too will pass and tomorrow will be a better day. And to look for progress step by step rather than putting too much pressure on yourself to be able to do things within the time scale. I had an internal spinal stimulator fitted in 2004. I couldn't walk before that more than a couple of steps. And now my mobility has improved, but it's been very, very slow.
How does it feel to be able to walk again? I mean, if my mum would be able to walk without a stick or even use her scooter, I think it would be life-changing.
It happens very slowly. So sometimes something will pull you up short and you think, oh, I can do that, which I couldn't do before. But in the moment, as you are progressing, I don't know that you always count that blessing that it's happened. It's when you look back and think, oh, I have made progress. But, even in a wheelchair, and I still have to use a wheelchair if I'm out of the house and I go into the town and so on, it's not about the wheelchair. People think that that's, a terribly negative thing. Actually, for me, that was my chariot on fire. That was my enabler. It allowed me to do things that otherwise I wouldn't be able to do. And, that for me is the really important thing. Everybody, I think disability is a metaphor for life. So people are limited by their beliefs. I'm too tall, I'm too short, too fat, too ugly, not rich enough, I'm too young, too old. Those beliefs you take with you. The fact that my legs don't work as well as I want them to, I get in my wheelchair and I go off at full speed and I go and do the things I want to do. So saying to your listeners, are your beliefs enabling you and facilitating you to be the best you can be, or are they limiting you? Because those beliefs can be changed. They've been installed at some point, but it doesn't make them cast in concrete. You can change them.
So what kind of steps would you recommend to someone who has either had these labels thrust upon them or thrust upon them themselves? They've given them their own labels. I can't do that because I'm too much, or I'm too loud, or too enthusiastic.
I'm an NLP master practitioner, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And when I'd done my training, I decided to go and see as many people as possible using NLP and to see how they used it. And I decided to go and see Anthony Robbins, who's perhaps the most well-known motivational speaker in the world. And I went to the Excel Centre in East London, and there were 10,000 people on the course. And part of the course was to do the fire walk. So if you're not familiar with that, you walk in bare feet over red hot coals without burning your feet, because you're in the right mindset. Now, in the morning of that day, he'd been talking about a course that he was doing in America, and I had completely dismissed it. I liked the idea of it, but thought, I'm in a manual wheelchair, I'd have to do it on my own, never going to manage. Just dismissed it. So it came to the fire walk, and somebody helped me. I gave me the balance, somebody each side, and I did the fire walk, and I was absolutely chuffed to mint balls. And I sat back in my wheelchair, and the guy behind me was a double amputee. He had his legs amputated above the knee, and he'd tipped himself onto his hands, and he'd walked the hot coals on his hands. And I thought, if he's doing that, then I'm self-limiting. If he can do that, I can go to America. I booked my flight. I went off. I've done all Anthony Robbins training. I've done other stuff. I've travelled to learn on my own. And I am forever grateful to that guy who, he's no idea who I am, and I don't know his name. But in that moment, people would say that I hadn't self-limited. I travelled all over the country to do training and facilitation. But I recognised that what he was teaching me is the limits of what we put on ourselves. And we all do it. There isn't a single person alive who in some way doesn't put limits on themselves that are actually there to be broken.
I'm kind of a bit stunned, to be honest, because of the stuff you're saying to me. I mean, I'm really taking that in because I put too much pressure on myself, and I say, you can't do this, you can't do that. But it's just that ripple effect, like we were saying earlier, with that gentleman you're talking about, who's affected you, who's affected me, whoever's listening to this podcast, it's going to affect you completely. Finally, last question, what would you say are the key things for someone to live a happy and fulfilled life?
Firstly, to recognise that everything you do is a choice, and every choice has consequences. What you say, how you say it, when you say it. The second thing I would say is take responsibility, 100% responsibility for everything you do. Nobody can make you happy or unhappy unless you choose to let them. And so recognise that actually your happiness or otherwise is down to you. Thirdly, that everything that we are thinking, our actions, 95% of those are habitual. They don't cross our conscious mind. We go into these habitual ways of thinking and habitual ways of acting. And I would say be aware, because if those habitual ways of thinking and being are constructive and positive, great. But my experience is that we've all got very negative patterns of behaviour.
If you want to find out more about Steps to Happiness, the fantastic books that Gina has written, or reach out for some guidance for yourself, head on over to Genuinely-You for more information. Thanks for listening to the 5th episode of Let's Go Kickass today, and to my fabulous guests, Gordon Mack, Rosemary Brown and Gina Gardiner. Feel free to subscribe, comment, rate and share. I'm Vicky Carter, and keep kicking ass.